A soldier's land story. James Mitchell had served in the U.S. Army for over 20 years, earning medals and accolades for his bravery in foreign wars. But when he returned home to the small town of Clearwater, he thought the hardest battle would be adjusting to civilian life. Little did he know, the hardest fight of all would be on his own turf, the home he had dreamed of owning. After his service, James decided to settle down in the town where he grew up. With the help of his military benefits, he found an old, worn house at the end of an oak-lined street. It was perfect for him, a quiet space to rest and rebuild his life. But he had to rent first, until he could get back on his feet. The landlord, Mr. Charles Landon, was an older man, stoic and a little rough around the edges. At first, James thought their relationship would be professional, just two men doing business. But from the first meeting, something felt off. It was small things at first. Odd comments about James' military service, remarks about outsiders in the neighborhood, and a subtle, insidious tension that seemed to surround the old man whenever James came by to pay rent. James, used to overcoming adversity, let it slide. He told himself that the man was just old-fashioned. But when a neighbor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Patterson, invited James over for tea one afternoon, the truth came to light. Over a cup of chamomile tea, Mrs. Patterson hesitantly mentioned how she had seen Landon turn away several African-American tenants over the years. She explained how he often took advantage of vulnerable people, charging them high rents and keeping them on shaky leases, knowing they couldn't afford to challenge him. "You're not the first," she said gently. "And you won't be the last if you don't do something about it." It was a gut punch to James. His time in the military had made him used to fighting enemies on foreign soil, but fighting at home felt like a new and terrifying battle. One evening, after weeks of gathering evidence and speaking to others who had experienced the same treatment, James finally confronted Mr. Landon. He had prepared for this moment, steeling himself, but as soon as he saw the old man's face, a wave of confusion washed over him. Landon was sitting in his chair as he always was, a cigar hanging from his lips. James stood in the doorway, fists clenched, ready to tear into him about the injustice he'd endured. But as he began to speak, the words caught in his throat. "Mr. Landon, we need to talk." Landon's eyes flicked up, his face unreadable. James took a deep breath. "I know what you've been doing. You've been renting to people who can't afford to speak out. I won't be one of them." Landon didn't say anything. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, thick and heavy. Then, to James' shock, the older man's face softened. His eyes, usually so cold, welled up with tears. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," Landon murmured. "I didn't know how to do it." James was taken aback. "What are you talking about?" Landon wiped his eyes, his voice trembling. "You don't understand. I wasn't always this way. You see, I was one of the first soldiers to be sent to the front lines during the Second World War. My best friend in the army was black. His name was Isaiah. We fought side by side through hell and back. He saved my life more times than I can count." He paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "But when we got home, everything was different. I was given a house, a job, a future. He wasn't. I watched him get pushed to the back of the line for everything, and I couldn't do anything about it. I didn't know how to help him then, and I still don't know how to make up for it." Landon's face twisted in pain as he continued. "I tried to atone for it in my own way by controlling what little I had. But I was just trying to make sense of it all. I thought I could help people like Isaiah. But it just ended up hurting more." James stood there, stunned by the confession. He had expected a fight, an argument, maybe even a denial. But this was not what he had imagined. "You never had the courage to stand up for him, did you?" James asked softly. Landon shook his head, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I couldn't. And now I see that I've done the same thing to others. I've hurt people like Isaiah, people like you. And I'm sorry. I truly am." James' heart raced as the weight of what he had just learned hit him. It was as if the years of racial tension, injustice, and pain had suddenly converged in that moment. The old man wasn't just a villain in the story. He was a broken man, caught in the web of his own guilt and shame. "I don't know what to do with this, Mr. Landon," James said quietly. "But I know I can't keep letting this happen. You have to change. We both do." Landon nodded, his face crumpling in remorse. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to try. I want to fix what I've done." The two men stood there facing each other in the quiet of the house as the evening sky outside began to turn dark. Neither of them knew exactly what the future held, but in that moment, they both understood something deeper than any policy or law could provide. Redemption came not through fighting enemies, but through facing the truth of one's own actions. And for James Mitchell, the battle he had faced in foreign lands had only prepared him for the most important battle of all, the battle for compassion, for understanding, and for healing.